An undercover CEO stumbles upon a heartbreaking sight, a warehouse worker scavenging for food from the trash. What happens next is nothing short of life-changing. Oliver Grant had poured his heart and soul into building his company from the ground up. 10 years ago, he was the one lifting heavy boxes, rushing to make deliveries, and negotiating every deal with determination. But as the company grew and expanded into multiple warehouses, his role shifted. These days, he spent most of his time in boardrooms, relying on managers to oversee daily operations. Yet something didn't feel right. Customer complaints were piling up. Shipments were constantly delayed. Employees were leaving in waves, seeking better opportunities elsewhere. The reports from his regional managers painted a picture of efficiency and success, but deep down, Oliver sensed that reality was far from perfect. Unwilling to ignore his gut instinct, he made a bold decision. He would go undercover and experience the reality of his business firsthand. What he discovered shook him to the core and led to a transformation no one could have expected. Stay with us for this powerful and eye-opening story. If it moves you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Real stories like these have the power to inspire change. Disguised as an inexperienced trainee named Owen, Oliver stepped into a world that was supposed to be his own but felt like a stranger's. Gone were his tailored suits, polished shoes, and commanding presence. Instead, he donned an old faded hoodie, a pair of worn-out jeans, and thick-rimmed glasses that made him nearly unrecognizable. To ensure no one could identify him, he chose a warehouse far from the company's headquarters, one where he had never met the staff in person. He wanted to see the truth, raw and unfiltered. What he found was nothing short of shocking. The hiring process was practically non-existent. No background checks, no formal training. Just a hurried introduction from an overworked shift supervisor who barely looked up before tossing him a scanner and muttering, "Stick with the others. Don't mess up." The warehouse floor was pure chaos. Forklifts sped past recklessly, just inches from disaster. Boxes teetered dangerously, one wrong move away from toppling over. The workers, his employees, moved like machines, their faces drained of life, their shoulders heavy with exhaustion. Some whispered their frustrations under their breath. Others said nothing at all, their silence speaking volumes. Oliver's first task was sorting inventory with a small team. That's where he met Jake. Jake was young, early 20s at most. His uniform was far too big, hanging off his thin frame like it belonged to someone else. His eyes carried a weight far beyond his years, shadowed by exhaustion that sleep couldn't seem to cure. Despite his worn-out appearance, Jake worked harder than anyone else. He moved with a determination that stood out, pushing himself to the limit. But there was something about him that didn't sit right with Oliver. Every time the supervisor walked by, Jake flinched. His hands tightened, his shoulders hunched, as if expecting a blow that never came. And he kept glancing at the clock. Not with boredom, but with desperation, as if counting the seconds until he could finally escape. There was more to Jake's story, something deeper than just fatigue. Oliver could feel it, and he couldn't turn away. Lunchtime arrived, but Oliver didn't eat. Instead, he observed, most workers had brought simple packed meals, homemade sandwiches, leftover rice, instant noodles hastily microwaved in the break room. Some ate quickly, eager to steal a few minutes of rest before returning to the grind. Others laughed in small groups, trying to find a sliver of joy in the monotony of the workday. But Jake had nothing. He sat alone at the corner of the break area, his fingers gripping the edge of his chair as he stared at the vending machine. His gaze lingered on the snacks inside, not with casual interest, but with hesitation. It was the look of someone making a painful decision, someone weighing the value of a few crumpled dollars against the hunger clawing at his stomach. Oliver felt a pang in his chest. Then something happened that sent a cold wave through him. Jake glanced around carefully, making sure no one was watching. When he thought the coast was clear, he stood up, walking over to the trash bin near the break area. And then, he reached in. Oliver's breath caught in his throat. At that moment, everything changed. Jake reached into the trash bin and pulled out a half-eaten sandwich, still wrapped in its crumpled paper. For a moment, he just held it in his hands, staring at it as if it were a rare treasure, something too valuable to waste. Slowly, he unwrapped it with careful fingers, inspecting it as though it were the most precious thing in the world. Then, with a hesitation that spoke of deep hunger, he took a small bite, chewing deliberately, savoring every second as if this meager scrap of food was the best meal he had tasted in a long time. Oliver felt something inside him twist. His heart sank as he watched the quiet desperation in Jake's eyes, the way his shoulders slumped under the crushing weight of survival. The image of one of his own employees, someone working under his name in his company, digging through the trash just to have something to eat, sent a shockwave of guilt and fury coursing through him. He had seen hardship before. He had known what it meant to struggle, but never, not once, had he imagined that kind of suffering existed within the very walls of the business he had built. He had always believed that hard work led to stability, that dedication was rewarded with security. But here was Jake, proving him wrong in the most painful way possible. Oliver couldn't stay silent. He had to act. He walked over, keeping his voice low. "Hey, man, you okay?" Jake froze mid-bite. His eyes went wide with panic, like a trapped animal caught in the open. He swallowed hard and stammered. I, I wasn't stealing." It was already thrown away. His voice was barely above a whisper, thick with shame and fear, as if he expected punishment just for trying to survive. Oliver's stomach twisted even more. "You don't have food?" he asked gently. Jake hesitated, then shrugged, trying and failing to mask the embarrassment on his face. "I get paid Friday," he muttered. "Just gotta make it until then." Oliver slowly sat down beside him. "You don't have money for food?" A hollow laugh escaped Jake's lips, empty and bitter. "Not after rent. Not after paying off what I owe." His voice trailed off, and he looked away, avoiding Oliver's gaze as though saying it out loud somehow made it worse. "It's fine. I've done worse." Oliver's chest tightened. It was not fine, not even close. Those words, "I've done worse," echoed in his head, unsettling him. What could possibly be worse than digging through the trash for something to eat? And how many others in his company were in the same position? This wasn't just one man's hardship. It was the symptom of something deeper, something rotten festering within his business. Before Oliver could say another word, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Jake! Break's over!" Jake's entire body stiffened. In an instant, he shoved what remained of the sandwich into his pocket and shot up from his seat, moving with a fear-driven urgency that made Oliver's blood boil. He watched as Jake hurried off, his shoulders hunched, his steps quick and sharp, like a man always bracing for the next blow. Oliver sat there, his mind racing. He had come here expecting to see inefficiency, maybe some managerial neglect. But what he had uncovered was something far worse. This wasn't just poor leadership. This was a system that crushed people, that bled them dry, leaving them with nothing. His jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists. If the reports from his managers painted a picture of success while his workers were starving, then something was deeply, deeply broken, and he was going to find out exactly what it was. One thing was certain. He wasn't leaving this warehouse until he uncovered the full truth. The time for watching and waiting was over. It was time to confront the people responsible. Oliver walked straight into the warehouse office, where Carl, the warehouse manager, sat with a few other supervisors, lounging like kings in a castle. They sipped their coffee, their laughter filling the room as they swapped jokes about a worker who had struggled with a heavy load earlier that day. The sheer cruelty of it made Oliver's skin crawl. They weren't just incompetent, they were callous. He didn't hesitate. With quiet precision, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his company ID, and placed it firmly on the desk in front of them. "I'm Oliver Grant, CEO of this company." The room turned deathly silent. Carl's face drained of color. One of the other supervisors sputtered, nearly choking on his coffee. Another's eyes flickered toward the door, his posture stiffening, as though he were already planning his escape. Oliver's voice was steady, calm even, but each word carried the weight of iron. "I've spent 2 days on this floor," he said, his tone sharp as steel. "I've seen how you run this place. I've watched you steal from my employees, cut their hours, dock their pay. Push them into loan traps that leave them with nothing? No one dared to speak. Oliver let his words hang in the air, his fury simmering just beneath the surface. This wasn't just about mismanagement. This was exploitation, and it was going to end. Now. Oliver took a step forward, his gaze cold and unwavering. He had given Carl the chance to speak, but he already knew the truth. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? His voice cut through the air like a blade. Carl stammered, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to form a response. Sir, Save it, Oliver snapped, his tone sharp with finality. You're fired. Carl paled, his face draining of color, but Oliver wasn't done. I'll also be launching a full investigation into every financial record tied to this warehouse. Carl stood frozen, his throat bobbing as if he wanted to argue, to plead, to explain. But it was too late. The damage was done, and Oliver had seen enough. The door swung open, and security guards stepped in, their presence a silent confirmation that this was no empty threat. Carl flinched, his breath quick and shallow, as they moved toward him. Rick, one of Carl's closest allies, shifted uneasily. He cast a furtive glance toward the exit, clearly hoping to slip away unnoticed. But Oliver had been watching. Rick, he called, his voice steady, unshaken. Don't think I've forgotten about you. Rick froze. You're just as guilty. Security didn't wait for further instruction. One by one, Carl and his accomplices were led out of the office, their footsteps heavy with defeat. Out on the warehouse floor, workers had gathered, their eyes wide with shock. Some exchanged uncertain glances, whispering amongst themselves, trying to process the sudden upheaval. Others simply stood in the stunned silence, too used to the suffocating weight of corruption to believe that it was finally being lifted. Then Oliver turned to them, his voice firm yet resolute. Effective immediately, he announced, all illegal wage deductions are over. Any stolen wages will be restored, and by the end of the week, a new management team will be in place. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, slowly it began. A ripple of quiet applause, hesitant at first, as if the workers weren't sure whether it was real. But as the weight of his words sank in, relief washed over them like a wave. The applause grew louder. Some cheered. Others closed their eyes, exhaling years of pent-up frustration. The nightmare was finally over. Jake stepped forward, his expression raw with emotion. His lips parted as if searching for the right words, but in the end, he only managed to. Thank you. Oliver placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, his grip firm, steady. No one in my company will ever have to go through this again, he promised. But Oliver wasn't finished. He spent the next several hours locked in the warehouse office, poring over financial records. And the deeper he dug, the worse it became. Tens of thousands of dollars had been siphoned from employee paychecks. Performance reports had been falsified. Work hours had been intentionally underreported. It was systemic theft. By the time he stepped out of that office, Oliver had built an airtight case against Carl and his entire corrupt network. He wasted no time. He called an emergency meeting with corporate HR and legal advisors. Policies would be rewritten, safeguards would be enforced. Warehouse leadership would undergo extensive retraining. This would never happen again. The following morning, Oliver stood in front of the entire warehouse team, his voice ringing with conviction. This company will no longer operate under fear and corruption, he declared. Your work matters. You deserve respect, fair wages, and a safe working environment. For the first time in years, the workers felt heard. A thunderous round of applause erupted from the crowd. Some smiled, others fought back tears. But there was one undeniable truth in that moment. Things were changing. 1 week later, a new management team had taken over. The toxic culture that had plagued the warehouse for so long was being dismantled, piece by piece. And something incredible happened. Productivity didn't just improve, it soared. Not because of fear, not because workers were being pushed past their limits, but because, for the first time in a long time, they felt valued. I'm Oliver Grant, CEO of this company. Company-wide audit across all warehouses. Corruption would never take hold again. Employees who had once been voiceless now had direct communication channels with corporate leadership. By the end of the year, turnover had dropped by 40%. Customer satisfaction had skyrocketed. The company was thriving, not just in profit, but in purpose. 2 months later, Oliver implemented a real change had begun. Lessons learned. Oliver Grant's story isn't just about a CEO going undercover. It's a testament to responsibility, ethics, and workers' rights. What he uncovered wasn't just mismanagement, it was a system of exploitation, one that kept employees trapped in cycles of financial hardship. 1. Empathy and leadership matter. Oliver could have remained in his corporate office, trusting the polished reports from his managers, but he chose to see the truth for himself. His actions remind us that true leaders go beyond numbers. They listen, they observe, and they care. 2. Standing up against injustice. When Oliver witnessed the corruption and mistreatment in his own company, he didn't turn a blind eye. He didn't just fire the guilty parties, he dismantled the entire system that allowed it to happen. This is a lesson in courage. Real change happens when we take action instead of staying silent. 3. The true value of a leader. A leader is not just someone who sits behind a desk, making decisions from a distance. A true leader is someone who understands and uplifts their employees. Oliver's reforms didn't just fix a broken system, they transformed his company from the ground up. 4. Fairness and dignity in the workplace. This story carries a powerful message for all of us. Fair wages, respect, and a safe working environment aren't just ethical obligations. They are the foundation of a company's success. No one should have to go hungry while working full-time. Pay attention to those around you. Have the courage to stand up, demand change, and never ever underestimate your own worth. Did this story resonate with you? If so, leave a comment and share your thoughts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button on Talk Story, where real-life stories spark change, ignite conversation, and remind us of the power of standing up for what's right.